Hello, class. I think it's about time that we introduced you to a big part of this class, which is a listing of the elements and the principles. The elements are often called the elements of art, and the principles are often called the principles of design. Um, the names really are just that. They're just names. These are not hard and fast rules by any means. They're just terms which people in the art community or people who are talking about art often use. So we're all on the same page because they're really, some of them can get pretty abstract. So anyway, this first slide here is something that you have in your essential handouts module on Canvas. This would be the 3D terms, which is another word for vocabulary. So you will always have that available. So you see the elements here: space, line, form. Form is what we call, what you would in 2D design, you would call it shape. When you're talking about 3D design, you call it form. Just FYI there. Light and value, texture, color, and then time and movement. You could also, the art world is changing so quickly and people are doing so many experimental things. Every time I see this list, I think, yes, but what about things that people are doing with sound? And probably a number of other things in the technical world or technology world that I don't know anything about. But anyway, those are the general terms called the elements, what we use to combine to make up our art. Over here, the principles are this is how we put these elements together. We can have repetitive areas, any of these elements. Also with that, and I don't have it listed here separately, but with that goes rhythm, which is, you kind of, when you think about rhythm, it's sort of a repeated pattern. Anyway, just know that that is also included in this repetition. Variety, so you've got things that look alike or repeat, elements that repeat, and down here in variety, elements that don't repeat necessarily. They're kind of a little bit different. Emphasis, economy, balance, and proportion. I'm not going to go over these in great detail right now because that's what the rest of the class is about, taking these one by one and really looking at a lot of the variations. But I wanted you to just to know what we were talking about when somebody throws out, like me, the term elements or principles. So let's get to this PowerPoint. If I can get to the PowerPoint. So here we have those elements of art again. And I just wanted you to know, be a little bit familiar with the terms. And I'll let you look at those at your leisure. Or not. Okay, why are we not moving here? There we go. Okay, so the first one, and these are just some samples. The first one is line. General terminology, an area whose length is considerably greater than its width. So here is a piece that has a line right through it. In this case, it's a crack that goes through this rock. This piece has to do with geologic faults, fault lines, and the breaking earth, particularly in California. So there are lines within form. And I'm not going to go through all of the ways that line is used, but I'm just going to, these are just like some basic samples. There's also linear work. One of your first long projects might be to do that wire piece. and that would be a linear work. It is made up of line. Implied or directional line. This one's a really interesting one. If you were standing over here and looking through these kind of tire shapes through the center of that would be that you would be having a line of sight created by that tubular channel there. It's an implied line. There isn't a straight line there, but they're implying that a line is going through here, or a directional line. And these are all kind of fun and extremely useful, this type of line. Then there's light, the degree of lightness and darkness also. So in this piece, you can see there's reflected light. You can see that the sun's coming down on this vineyard worker's back. You can see these highlights where it gets extremely light. In this case, it looks white. And then values, which is the same thing we talk about in two-dimensional art, the gradation of light to dark, where you can start to, you can see that there's volume here. You can see the fullness of the muscles on this guy's leg because of the way it changes from light to dark. This is a really interesting piece at the de Young Museum in San Francisco. It's a big dome outside, and in the top of the dome, there is a huge circular opening. Think of an igloo. And as the day moves on and the sun is going around in the sky, this big dot of light is moving around the perimeter of this, the inside of this dome. It's an interesting piece, and you can walk inside here and sit down. It's pretty fun. Anyway, so there's something called natural light, light as a medium, or light as something in itself that we make art out of. The next element is form. It is the volume and shape, there's that 2D term again, of a 3D work. So we've got primary and secondary form. Let's see if I can bring this up. Anyway, watch this arrow here. If I go up and take the extreme outside of this form, that is the primary form, okay, etc. The secondary forms in here would be, for example, inside here or inside here. So this is a little confusing, even though this is really simple. The very outside, and it will change. If I stepped 3 feet to the right on this piece, the primary form would change. Okay, so from wherever you are standing, the primary form is the silhouette of the piece at that moment, right, from where you are standing. And the secondary forms are just these interior forms, right, the delineation. Some other terminology, there are dynamic forms, forms that look like they are ready to change or move. In this case, this lion looks like he's ready to start roaring or, moving his head around as he roars. Also, this thing has exterior form. This is the exterior form. This doesn't particularly have an interior form, perhaps inside there, but not really something that's major in this case. Okay, the next term is texture. It's the next element. The tactile surface, either felt or visually perceived. Okay, so in this case, these are these worked pieces of a tree. The natural texture is just right there. It's just right off the tree, this big lump, and you can see the texture of the bark. Worked texture means that somebody used their hand or a tool to change that natural surface. In this case, this was cut with some sort of a saw. This was probably sanded. This back here was cut and probably sanded, etc. Here's some more worked texture. Somebody took this piece of metal, cut the outside. Here's the primary contour around here. Secondary contours would be these areas in here where there's a shift of the surface. But this has all been worked by some tool. A space is our next element. The 3D field that the artist works in. It's either filled or unfilled space. In this case, delineated forms in space. So actual outlined real forms in space, like these huge ceramic apples that are out on a field here. We can talk about scale when you're talking about space. And in this case, the scale of these is larger than life, okay? A real apple would just be a tiny thing down here, but the scale on this is very much enlarged. Also, something interesting that happens are when you have a series of pieces like this, you have activated surrounding space. So the piece here, these pieces, these individual pieces are, you might say that's the piece of art, the work of art. But when you walk through here, or even if you're looking at a distance, you get the sense that this whole area is part of the artwork, okay? The artist wanted these pieces separated in a certain way, you know, and that's how it's viewed. The artist made the decision about that. So this is activated surrounding space. Sometimes we can talk about confined space. If you walked down into the lobby of this building, you might even hesitate before you walked under this thing. It might be a little bit oppressive, this big black structure above you. But this area inside this sculpture would be called confined space. We can talk about scale in this one too. It always looks to me when I see this piece like some design student took some foam core, stuck it together, spray painted it black, and then made a little maquette, a little model of the piece. You know, maybe it's 7 inches tall or something. But that piece, whoops, is huge. The scale of it is kind of, I mean, you can't avoid thinking, what a massive abstract sculpture this is. Color is an extremely popular element, as we know, particularly in two-dimensional art, which has really very similar elements as three-dimensional art. So color is light reflected from a surface. So here you can see red down here. There's natural color, as in the wood here, the metal on this chain. I don't know whether that's metal or wood, that piece right there. The color of rubber is its natural color. Somebody didn't say, oh, let's make it black. Well, maybe they did. What do I know? Then there's applied color. The red here was spray painted on to these metal areas. So natural color and applied color. Time is, we throw in as an element. Some people don't, but time is also a really interesting way to look at artwork. In this case, I picked a simple way to look at it, and we call it kinetic art, If you came up to this piece and spun that bicycle wheel, it would spin around, right, until it stopped by gravity or whatever. So it's a piece that actually moves. And so it takes time for you to move it, and takes time for it to move in space and then to stop. So that's one of the ways we can talk about time. Then here is a brief introduction to the principles. We've got repetition. Kind of the opposite of that is variety. With repetition goes rhythm. I always think of these two as sort of sisters. There's balance, the visual balance or the visual weight of something, emphasis, economy, and proportion. So let's see what we've got for that. So repetition, in this case, you've got some two-dimensional repetition because the stars are painted on these boards here. You've got 3 different boards. The stripes are painted on. That's repetition in 2D art. But in the 3-dimensional realm, you've got these 3 boards. They are a repetition of this same proportion of this rectangle. You also have a little bit of rhythm going on here, since I'm going to introduce that in a second anyway. So you're kind of going, they're kind of set up beats. 1, 2, 3, or in 2-dimensionality, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you get, it's kind of a repetition. So rhythm, a regular pattern created by the elements. And sometimes those can be repeated elements or even varied elements. We won't get into that right now, but for this lecture, let's just say this regular pattern. So we can see this, the edge of this building goes down and up and down and up and down and up and down. And that's repeated over and over. And you're hitting these vertical elements here. You're setting up these rhythms, bump, 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 bump. So that's what we talk about when we're thinking about rhythm. Okay, and so variety. We've got repeated circles here, and that would be a repetition. There's a little variety in them. There's a little variety on the coloring of them. We've also got these geometric rectangular forms. They're not exactly the same. In fact, none of them are exact. Nothing here really is exactly the same. So they're repeated in a way, but they are variations on that theme. Except down here, well, this once was, these areas were rectangles, but an arc has been taken out of them from this repeated form up here, this circle that is sort of an implied shape here that's set up by this arc. So anyway, variety of form. We can talk about balance. And if you look at the primary contour of this, you know, it's a very symmetrical shape. It kind of looks like a television screen on a pedestal. When you get on the inside here, though, there's some symmetrical parts, but there's also asymmetrical parts. They're not mirror images here. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about asymmetry, not symmetrical. We can talk about emphasis. Whoops. Emphasis, a form or area that dominates. In this case, this head up here is really, it's kind of the most, it attracts the most attention. It's got like a target on there. It's got the darkest areas with these cavities for the eyes. Also, we are, as humans, are drawn to the human form. So we're always going to kind of try and make eye contact with a human. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons why that form dominates. Economy, often thought of when we're thinking about abstract art. This is a Henry Moore female, reclining female figure. This is the head, her upper torso, and her legs down here. So what you're doing, just like when, just like when you're getting your, putting together your grocery list and you think, man, I don't think I have enough money to buy that, that cracked crab this week. So I'm going to economize a little and leave that out so that I can buy another loaf of bread and some peanut butter. So you're eliminating things that you don't think are really all that necessary. Not all that necessary to actually get your idea across. In this case, the idea is this reclining female figure. Okay, we still know it's a reclining female figure, whether it has all the filled in areas or not. So another term, simplification, comes into use. Our last one here is proportion. And so we look at this female form, which is economized. No hair here, the cheekbones are taken out. These forms are sort of rounded and stylized a little bit. But the proportion on here, the head looks like it's, 1/7 or of this whole height here. The arms look right. They look like the right size to the torso, as do the legs. Everything looks correct. So anyway, that's the end of that. That's our introduction. So I will move on after this into the principles. So stay tuned for that.